Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. Martin Luther King Jr. Hello, my name is John Strand, and despite my supposedly First Amendment protected speech on social media, where I have voiced concerns with the legitimacy of the 2020 election, I nevertheless did not travel to Washington, D.C. in January of 2021 for the purpose of protesting at the Capitol. Although I openly supported those protesters who remained peaceful, I personally was present in my official capacity as a security detail for Dr. Simone Gold, who was a scheduled speaker alongside Representatives Paul Gosar, Lauren Boebert, and many others at a rally with a government-approved permit for the northeast corner outside the Capitol. I had no plans with anyone else that day. I never engaged in any action outside of my responsibility to protect my client, who herself did not knowingly engage in any violent or unlawful act and had no intention of anything beyond fulfilling her obligation of giving a speech. To reiterate, neither my client nor myself had any criminal intent, nor did we ever engage in any criminal act that we had present knowledge to be unlawful. Also, the fact that my client was illegally coerced into accepting a fraudulent plea does not, in any way whatsoever, negate these facts. I refused to take a plea because the government's statement of fact in that plea was nefariously false, and because I was not guilty of any criminal intent. But I was convicted by an openly prejudiced DC jury, and I was recently sentenced to nearly 3 years in prison and another 3 years probation by a judge who explicitly stated from the bench that his punishment was intensified by his resentment of my public criticisms of the government. 6 more years of my life ruined after 2.5 years of brutal government and ensuing public persecution, all because I protected a woman in a crowd. This is an unmitigated travesty of justice. I'll briefly outline 4 key points of grave concern. Number 1, the American rule of law dictates that each individual must be held accountable for their specific actions. It is abhorrent and anti-American to conflate and criminalize a single individual with the acts of another. And in fact, the protesters charged in the 2017 presidential inauguration riot were acquitted precisely because the prosecutors only associated them with the specific criminal acts of others without evidence proving criminal activity by those individuals being charged. Yet, this is exactly what the DOJ has done to me and hundreds of other J6 defendants with a 100% conviction rate. They are openly punishing individuals for merely being present at a political protest. Number 2, America's survival as a constitutional republic depends upon the inalienable right of free speech. President George Washington said, quote, "For if men are to be precluded from offering their sentiments on a matter, that would suggest the idea that reason is of no use to us, and then the freedom of speech may be taken away, and dumb and silent we may be led like sheep to the slaughter." The DOJ's dishonest distortions of my free speech to frame me as a criminal and mislead a jury have led to my wrongful conviction of serious crimes. And a DC judge's fury at my public criticism of the government's behavior has landed me years in prison. That is the textbook definition of fascism. This is the slaughter George Washington warned of, and it should horrify everyone. Number 3, the Equal Protection Clause and due process guarantees of the 4th and 14th Amendments prohibit selective prosecution. I ask you, how does a premeditated protest action occur during an active session of Congress, explicitly for the purpose of disrupting that congressional proceeding, and yet those protesters are legally excused and publicly praised? This happened in 2017. It was excused and praised because those protesters supported the agenda of the left. Countless examples of left-wing protests nearly always end with charges dropped and bail funds raised by Democrat politicians who aggressively and publicly support such protests, regardless of the violence frequently incurred. If you cannot see the harshly stark contrast of the unprecedented persecution inflicted on so many J6 defendants, then you are willfully and shamefully blind. And number 4, vertical overcharging is illegal, and the bastardization of Title 18 U.S. Code 1512 requires Congress to act because the executive branch's DOJ and the judiciary are violating legislative intent, clearly abusing a statute that was written 40 years ago to punish persons who tamper with witnesses or shred documents in an effort to destroy evidence. It's never been used this way before until now against protesters for J6. The DOJ has only grasped this non-germane statute in order to wield its 20-year prison penalty as leverage to ensure the immediate compliance of most defendants with their fraudulent plea deals. The misapplication and weaponization of this law against political protest is literally extremely dangerous to our democracy. January 6 is fraught with alarming evidence of government instigation and involvement, government cover-up, and government fraud. And J6 has brought an open subversion of the rule of law and a trampling of the Constitution. These mounting violations of our civil rights are an unprecedented abuse of power against the American people. It must end, or our republic will be lost.